Good afternoon, my opera-centric friends all over Hampton Roads, Tidewater, and the outlying areas. I'm glad to be back with you once again, and especially so because the opera we're going to examine under the microscope today is a beloved opera, one of my favorites, one of your favorites. Some of you know it very well. I've known it for half a century, and I've read pretty much everything there is to read about it. And, of course, I'm speaking of Puccini's La Boheme. I kind of struggled with a take that I could prepare for a single broadcast on public radio this afternoon because there are so many directions to go. Some of you probably know that I teach courses in opera appreciation for 10 different lifelong learning programs at colleges around the region. And man, those classes, I had 4 hours of material and didn't run out of things to say. So somehow I've got to narrow my focus today. I could have gone down the avenue of pointing out the main gist of the opera, one of the themes, which is coming of age. That the young Bohemians, there's a moment in Act 4 when their youth ends and they have to face harsh realities and become adults. And that's one thing we could have talked about. I could have talked about the architecture of the libretto and the incredible balance of contrasting elements that add up to make it kind of a simulation of real life, a very convincing virtual reality of experiences that we all go through when we are coming of age, and so many others, just an analysis of the musical procedures. But what I'd like to do is to look at La Boheme through the prism of a couple of historical angles. One, opera history and that movement that we call verismo around the end of the 19th century and into the early years of the 20th century. And then we also have to look at a little bit of social history as it relates to women's issues in the city of Paris in the time period that Puccini was setting in the 1830s. And I think that these two factors, opera history and social history, are going to wind up giving you, for some of you, a revelatory view of the two beloved leading characters, Rodolfo, our Bohemian poet and aspiring writer, and everybody's favorite sweet as sugar seamstress, Mimi. I can tell you that, if you don't know, I publish a weekly blog on behalf of Virginia Opera in which I blog about the operas that we stage. It's called Operation Opera, and if you just Google Operation Opera, you'll find the link to that blog. And I published an essay about Mimi recently, which to my surprise, became very popular. It had thousands and thousands of readers, and some of them were quite upset with my point of view. What I'm going to say about Mimi this afternoon is going to be revelatory for some of you. For some of you, it'll be what you've always believed, and you'll be nodding your head in agreement with me, and others of you will want to argue with me. You'll be a little upset. You'll think I'm being hard on Mimi and Rodolfo, and I don't mean to be. What we have to remember about La Boheme is that it is Puccini's most veristic opera. That is, the one that adheres most closely to the philosophies and aims and goals of those composers of the early 20th century and late 19th century that belonged to the Nuova Scuola, or the new school of Italian opera, and created a style called verismo. And what is verismo? We have to talk about that for a second. Verismo means truth. And the composers like Puccini, Leoncavallo, who wrote Pagliacci, and Mascagni, who wrote Cavalleria Rusticana, they were tired of what they called old-fashioned operas. They didn't want to write the kind of melodramas favored by quite often Verdi and Bellini and Donizetti and others. In that the characters Those operas were a little bit like fairy tales. They were about knights in shining armor. Those were the tenors. And those characters were valiant and dashing and brave and true. And the women they loved, the sopranos, were maidenly and chaste and guileless and innocent and faithful. And the villains, the baritones, were black-hearted and evil and rotten through and through with no redeeming characteristics. And the Nuova Scuola composers looked at each other and said, "Do you know anybody like that? I don't know anybody like that." And these old-fashioned operas like Il Trovatore and so many of the others, they were about nobility, noblemen of noble birth, and kings and queens and princes and dukes and earls and generals and warriors and gods and goddesses in some cases. The Verismo composer said, "How come we can't have an opera about the janitor? How about peasants, about ordinary people, about students, about clowns?" That's where we get Pagliacci. And do they have to be so either all virtuous or all rotten? People aren't either virtuous or rotten. We're all complicated, messy creatures. We're a conglomeration of good and bad traits. And how about we tell the truth about people? So, when you have a love duet in a Verismo opera, you have to not take it at face value. In Pagliacci, for instance, there's a gorgeous love duet between Nedda, the soprano, and the baritone Silvio. And it's so romantic, it's sweet as sugar, it's passionate. There's one problem. They're both adulterers. Nedda's married to somebody else. In a Verismo opera, when there's a beautiful love duet, there's something wrong with it. Very likely, those people don't belong together. So, with that in mind, I'll point out that at the end of Act 1 of La Boheme, we have one of the most sumptuously beautiful and, yes, romantic love duets. The poet Rodolfo and the seamstress Mimi have had what the film critic Roger Ebert used to call a meet-cute moment in romantic comedies. And in a sense, La Boheme is a romantic comedy. And their hands touch and they tell their little life stories to one another, and suddenly it's infatuation. And the word amore is just pouring out in gorgeous melody. And it sounds like this. Let's remember how it sounds. Yeah, that's true love, right? No, it isn't. They're infatuated. Friends, they've known each other for 5 minutes. You can't decide that an affair is true love based on how you feel about a pretty girl or a cute boy after knowing them for 5 minutes. Where's the logic in that? And as a matter of fact, as you'll see, in Act 2, which takes place only about half an hour after Act 1, suddenly there are already bumps in the road in their relationship. And by Act 3, they realize they're miserable together and they're no good together. And by Act 4, they've broken up. Don't over-romanticize Italian opera of the Verismo period. Just because it's an Italian opera and it's a love duet and the soprano is singing to the tenor and they use the word amore, it doesn't mean that it's real love. There are problems in this relationship, and I don't think that at this stage of his life, Rodolfo is capable of true love. I think he's got a lot of growing up to do. So let's put the brakes on that. Now, I really want to focus on the character of Mimi a little bit because, when we get to her great aria, Mi chiamano Mimi, in which she is telling Rodolfo who she is after he has just done the same for her in his aria, Che gelida manina, I think opera lovers, and I was guilty of this for a long time, tend to take what she says at face value. And I think that there are layers of communication to Mimi's aria that tell us a lot about who she is and what her goals are and what her aims are. So we're going to talk about Mimi for a little while. And here, as I said, I want to talk a little bit about social history. This whole opera was based on a novel about Bohemian Paris of the 1830s by Henri Murger. And if you're a woman in 1830s in Paris, your opportunities are limited. Women could not choose to get a college education. You couldn't major in comparative literature or fine art history. You could not choose a career in business or law or medicine. Very limited choices, a paternalistic society. Women, most women, they had as their goal to find themselves a husband and start cranking out children and being a housekeeper. But what if you couldn't or didn't wish to get married and you're in a big city like Paris? Then you might aspire to do, like what Eliza Doolittle did in My Fair Lady. You might want to get a job in a hat shop or a flower shop or a dress shop. The trouble is, look, even now in 2015, as you listen to the presidential debates, one of the issues is salary equality between men and women. Well, if that's a problem in 2015, imagine what it was like in 1830. These jobs for working girls in little shops, they did not pay a living wage. They brought in a few sous or a few francs, but not really enough to cover the cost of living. So what do? Women had to do whatever was necessary to survive. They learned survival skills. And this involved leveraging their sexuality. It's an uncomfortable subject, but this is just history. When you've done listening to this broadcast, I want you to go to a search engine and type in the word grisette, Grisette. Mimi is a grisette. That means the word gris, Gris, means gray, and these working girls tended to wear simple gray woolen dresses. They all kind of looked the same, and they could not live on their wages, as I say, so they depended on finding men who would help fill in the empty places in the budget. They would make themselves available to be picked up, as it were, by young men if they were attractive enough, and they would get their hair done just so, and they might go to a tavern where young boys with money hang out and look available and hope that some young man would invite them to share a meal. Hey, come over here. Tell me your name. Hi, I'm Rodolfo. What's your name? Have you eaten? Would you like a beer? Would you like a bowl of stew? Hey, waiter, bring this pretty girl a bowl of stew. And in this way, they could make it. They could get along by finding young men who would entertain them for an evening. The grisette would laugh at his jokes, and if they were singing songs, she would join in with the singing and have a nice evening. But listen to me carefully. At the end of the evening, there was a quid pro quo, because it was understood that this working girl would go back to the room or the home of the young man who had entertained her and bought her dinner, and she would sleep with him. It would happen. This was understood by both parties. And one of the most common types of working girls were seamstresses. And that's our Mimi. She takes in embroidery. So it's my contention that when Mimi makes her entrance halfway through Act 1, at the point at which the other three Bohemians, Marcello the painter, Schaunard the musician, and Colline the scholar and philosopher, have gone on ahead to get a table at their favorite cafe for Christmas dinner, And Rodolfo stays behind because he needs to work on he's on a deadline to finish an article. That it's no coincidence that Mimi chooses that moment to make her entrance, that she's been waiting until the other three had left so that she could introduce herself to Rodolfo when he was alone. She thinks Rodolfo is the cute one, and she is determined not to spend Christmas Eve alone in her room. I feel like, she has a packet of ramen noodles and a jar of mustard, and that's all that she's got, and she is not going to spend Christmas dinner by herself. She's going to get invited out with the cute boy, and so when she makes this famous entrance with her Mi Chiamano Mimi theme playing in the background, this is her plan. Has her candle really gone out?
Una donna.
Oh, could you please light my candle? It's gone out, she says. Well, we know already that when she wants to prolong her visit, she's going to deliberately blow it out again. It's always staged that way. I think it's a rather flimsy excuse. I think she's gone up there with a candle and knocked on the door so that she can be admitted and she can start up a conversation with Rodolfo. And when Rodolfo does light her candle and clearly, it's time for her to leave, and she makes her way to the door. Golly gee, what a coincidence. She just happens to have dropped her room key somewhere. So she's managed to prolong her visit, and they're both pretending to look for the key, which Rodolfo finds pretty soon. And just as Mimi was hoping he does, he slips it in his pocket. And before you know it, he's pouring out his life story, telling her that her little hand is cold. Oh, that's another take I could have presented this morning on La Boheme, the imagery of cold. Cold and heat is just as important in La Boheme as the image of light in the next opera that we'll be presenting, Romeo and Juliet, after the holidays. But that's another tale for another day. Rodolfo says, well, let's listen to a little excerpt from his aria Che gelida manina, and on the other side, I'll tell you what he was saying.
Chi son? Sono un poeta. Che cosa faccio? Scrivo e come vivo. Il povero Italia lieta, caro da gran signore, rivedini d'amore per sogni e per chimere, e bene castelli d'Aria.
Alrighty, now, I don't know how your Italian is, but I know that part pretty well. He says, Chi son? Sono un poeta. Who am I? I'm a poet. It's funny he says that because, in Mozart's Don Giovanni, we know that Don Giovanni is the greatest lover of all time, and yet he fails to actually have sex with any of the three women he tries to seduce. And in La Boheme, Rodolfo is this talented poet, and yet three times we see him attempt to write something, and he never gets anything written. I personally don't think he's going to be a poet. I think he may wind up being a school teacher 10 years after this opera's over. But that's another tale for another day. Then he goes on to say, in povertà mia lieta, in my happy poverty, I live like a great lord. I may be poor, but in dreams and fancies and castles in the air, you thought that was an American English idiom, didn't you? In castles in the air, I'm a millionaire. Now, I want to tell you, Mimi is listening very carefully. In fact, mentally, she's taking notes. She's making a list. She's saying, poet, check. Dreams and fancies, check. Okay, she is angling. She really wants to have an affair with Rodolfo. Right now, she wants to be invited out for Christmas dinner. So when she sings Mi chiamano Mimi, she's talking about how she loves to embroider flowers, and then she talks about how she loves real flowers and all those beautiful things which speak of poetry. Oh, you're a poet? Golly, I love poetry. Notice that lei m'intende, that she says right at the end, and Rodolfo answers si. She says, do you understand me? He says, yes. I love poetry. Do you hear me? I love poetry, and you're a poet. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, he does. Well, she's not done. She goes on. Let's hear another little bit out of the middle section of this aria, and then again I'll do some kind of significant translating for you. All right, now, everything she said right there was communicating in a sort of code to Rodolfo. It was all code for I'm available. She said, I live all alone. I cook my meals all by myself. Translation, I have no boyfriend, no lover. You have no competition. Your path is clear. Ask me out. Then she says, I don't always go to Mass. Translation, I'm not one of those goody-goody prude girls who won't put out. I will sleep with you. Then she says, but I often pray to the Lord. Well, I'm a nice girl. You'll like me. I'm not a slutty whore. Then again, for emphasis, she says, vivo sola, soletta. Yeah, I live alone, all alone. Are you listening, Rodolfo? You have no competition. There's no boyfriend. Go for it. And then, and this is something that just occurred to me, opera friends. Like I tell you, I'm in my 60s. I've known this opera since I was 12, and this just occurred to me a few weeks ago. Then, at the end of that passage you just heard, she said, when I'm in my little white room, I look out through the window over the skies of Paris. Now, that caught my attention. She looks out over the skies of Paris. I have a theory. I think it's possible that from the moment that the opera began and the curtain went up and Marcello was painting and Rodolfo was trying to write, I think she was outside their front door listening, eavesdropping, ducking into the shadows when the other roommates arrived. Why? Because here is Rodolfo's opening line.
Nei cieli vigi, guarda tu guarda in il vignoli Parigi, e penso a quella poltrone, un vecchio talento ingannatore, che vive in ozio come un gran signor.
Now, what did he say? Marcello was painting. He noticed that Rodolfo wasn't writing, so he said, "Che fai? What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just looking out at the gray skies of Paris, looking at all the chimneys and wishing that ours was working." He's looking out over the gray skies of Paris. Do you realize that in that last excerpt I played of Mimi, she was paraphrasing what he said? Yeah, I often just look out over the skies of Paris. She is just shamelessly, in her sweet, demure way, she is saying, "Please take me out somewhere." And so then he takes the bait. He's infatuated. Wow, we have so much in common. We like all the same movies and everything. And so comes that lovely love duet O Soave Fanciulla, which was the first thing I played several minutes ago. But then the duet proceeds. I didn't play you the entire duet. Let's listen to a little bit more, and then I'll tell you what's going on in it.
E al ritorno curiosa dammi il braccio mia piccina, obbedisco signore, che m'ami
This libretto is so good. Every bit of Italian that you heard right there was pregnant with meaning. At first, at the top of that excerpt, Rodolfo made a pass at her. He tried to kiss her. She said, "Oh, no, don't. Well, be mine, please." Rodolfo wants to make out right then and there. And very primly but very firmly, Mimi says, "No, your friends are waiting." Actually, no, I've got ahead of myself. Rodolfo says, "You don't want to kiss me? Are you telling me should I just go? Do you want me to just go? Are you sending me away?" And Mimi says, "Well, I was kind of thinking, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but I was wondering if maybe, I could go with you." Do you understand what she did? She just invited herself to Christmas dinner at his expense. He did not ask her to dinner. She said, "Can I go with you to dinner?" And he says, "Oh, but you don't want to go out now. It's cold outside. Don't you want to stay in here? Don't you want to stay and have sex?" And that's when, very primly but firmly, she says, "No, your friends are waiting for us." And he says, "Oh, okay, well, um, I guess." And she says, "No, it'll be okay. We'll be together." And then, with great hope but with great meaning, Rodolfo says, "Et al ritorno?" And when we return, I mean, are we ever going to make out? And she says, "Curioso, wouldn't you like to know?" Very teasingly. That, my friends, is a business transaction. "All right, I'll take you to dinner. Will there be sex?" "Yes, there will be sex." And then he says, "Che m'ami dir?" Rodolfo does not say, "Oh, baby, I love you." He says, "Tell me you love me." She says, "I love you." Now, I'm not suggesting, don't get your feathers in a ruffle, opera friends. I'm not suggesting Mimi doesn't love Rodolfo. She comes to love him. When she's facing the end of her life and her own mortality, she realizes what was really important to her all along, and she realizes, she tells Rodolfo, "You were the love of my life." Right now, she is being a grisette. She's doing and saying what she must do and say to survive, to make a life for herself. The boy wants me to say, "I love him." Well, he is cute, and I would like to have an affair with him, and I really want to go out for Christmas dinner. Sure, I love you. It is very telling about Rodolfo's character that he does not say, "I love you." For Rodolfo is the typical young man. Love for him is all about how he feels, not about how the girl feels. And we'll see that now in Act 2. So Act 2, as I say, takes place, 10, 15, 20 minutes later. They make a short walk to the Café Momus in the Latin Quarter, and there's chaos. It's like being in Times Square on New Year's Eve. There's a huge crowd, vendors, mothers, children, shoppers, diners. And we focus in. You'll hear Mimi. She asked Rodolfo to buy her a bonnet. How about that? He's already taking her to dinner, and she wants him to buy her stuff. "There's a cute bonnet. Would you buy me that?" Sure, okay. So in this excerpt, she comes out with the bonnet, and Rodolfo says, "Yeah, that's a good color. It looks good against your brunette hair." And then she says, "Oh, look at that coral necklace. That's so pretty. I love that." You're going to hear Rodolfo say, "I've got a wealthy uncle who's a millionaire. Once he dies, I'll be rich and I'll buy you all the necklaces in the world." Mimi wants stuff. She can't afford a bonnet. She can't afford jewelry. She's got a boyfriend now. Obviously, he's not wealthy, but that's okay. She's going to sleep with him. It's up to him to provide her with stuff. She's a grisette. She needs a bonnet. She would love some jewelry. He's realizing this is a little more complicated than I thought it was going to be. I thought she was into me and we were just going to make love like crazed otters all night long. All of a sudden, I'm buying her dinner and buying her stuff with money that I don't really have. Oh, boy. And then their love affair, which is not even an hour old yet, they haven't even slept together yet, it becomes quite verismo. Listen to this little exchange, and I'll tell you what Rodolfo's doing.
Ti guardi all'uom felice sta il sospetto accanto io mi sazio spazio
Chi guardi, he said. Who are you looking at? Were you looking at that man? Are you flirting? Me? What are you talking about? Are you jealous, she says? He says, well, a happy man, a man who's happy in love is always a little jealous. And to kind of ease out of an awkward conversation, Mimi said, well, are you happy? Oh, yes, I'm happy, he said. But there you have it. This is not Radames and Aida. This is not Leonora and Manrico. This is not Fidelio. This is not mature, true love. He's known her for half an hour, and he's already showing signs of being pathologically jealous. Well, then he brings her over to the table where the other Bohemians are waiting for them. And, he's got a girl with him. So Rodolfo introduces her. This is Mimi, he says. You know, it's like she's an embroideress. She's a seamstress. She embroiders flowers. And it's like, I'm the poet and she's the poetry.
Questa è Mimì, Gaia fioraia, il suo venire completa, la bella compagnia, perché sono il poeta, e sarà poesia.
That's not mature love. You see, Rodolfo just said, this is all about me. It's like, I'm a poet. Of course, he just burned his 5-act play to get a little bit of heat and was not writing. He tried twice to write an Act 1 and failed both times. But he loves to say, I'm a poet. And she's like, the poetry. See, it's all about Rodolfo. That's how it is with young boys in love. Young boys will say, ooh, baby, you're so great. You make my stomach churn. I can't sleep. I'm freezing. I'm burning all over. Young, immature people in love, it's all about how they feel, not about how the other person feels. And Rodolfo right now, I'm a poet, and she's my poetry. This is not mature love, and it's going to turn out not to be true love, at least for one of them, or at least until it's too late. Pretty soon, the other couple gets together. We've had the tragic couple, and Rodolfo and Mimi are tragic because Mimi is doomed. She has tuberculosis, and she's going to succumb to it before they can ever reconcile their feelings about one another. But now we have the comic couple, Marcello the painter and Musetta the chanteuse. She's either a lorette, a kept woman, or a courtesan, a great lover, a companion of wealthy men and millionaires and great men, like Violetta Valéry in La Traviata. Whatever it is, we want to get Musetta and Marcello back together again, and Musetta is putting on quite a scene there in the Latin Quarter. She's acting like a hussy. She's smashing plates. She's disrespecting the elderly millionaire who's following her around, shopping with her. She's flirting shamelessly with Marcello, and Rodolfo again. There is a small moment in the midst of all this kind of funny comedy in which Rodolfo says, if you ever behave like Musetta, I would never forgive you. Rodolfo, what are you doing? What are you doing talking like that to this girl who's going to go home and sleep with you?
Sappi per tuo governo che non darei perdono in sempiterno.
So by the time the curtain falls, the couple of pathos is together, and the comic couple is together, and it's all going to kind of go klaflooey in Act 3. And sure enough, I said that, don't take that suave fanciulla love duet too literally, because it sounds like true love, but the ugly truth comes out in Act 3. Mimi goes to the tavern where Marcello is in residence with Musetta. They're teaching, painting, and singing, and kind of cobbling out a living together. And she needs to talk with Marcello because she tells him, it's not working. We can't be together. I'm miserable. Rodolfo is abusive to me. He yells at me. He's pathologically jealous. He tells me to find another lover. I don't know what to do. And as you'll hear in this excerpt, Marcello says, well, when people can't be happy together, they should separate. It's the ugly truth that all the parties are going to realize as this action unfolds. Poor Marcello, he's kind of caught in the middle because after Mimi takes her leave of him, although she doesn't really leave, she goes to hide behind some bushes and trees because out bounds Rodolfo, and now he wants to talk with Marcello. Marcello is everybody's big brother. And Rodolfo comes out in quite a bouncy bunch of high spirits. He does not sound very emotional, and he has some news for Marcello. He says, you know what? I've got to leave Mimi. It's not working. We're going to break up. Voglio separarmi da Mimi. I want to separate with Mimi. It's getting boring, he says. What's the use? It was fun for a while, but now it's boring. Well, he certainly doesn't sound heartbroken. He doesn't sound tragic. The fact is he's lying to himself. That's another take you could discuss about La Boheme, the contrast between lies and truth. Lying to others, lying to oneself, and finally facing unpleasant truths. But for right now, he's trying to put up a false front of casual unconcern. In fact, in that little speech you just heard, Rodolfo reminds me of no one except Paul Simon and that song that was popular when I was in college, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover.
50 ways to leave your lover. You just slip out the back, Jack. Make a new plan, Stan. You don't need to be coy, Roy. Just get yourself free. Hop on the bus, Gus. You don't need to discuss much. Just drop off the key, Lee, and get yourself free.
Yeah, he sounds just about that unconcerned, doesn't he? However, with prodding from Marcello, who's not buying any of this baloney, finally the unpleasant truth comes out, and Rodolfo has to admit what the real reason is. And We empathize with Rodolfo. We understand where he's coming from, but I'm not sure that this speech will do him any credit. In the excerpt you're about to hear, he says, "All right, I'll tell you the truth. The real problem is Mimi is sick. I think she's dying. She has this terrible cough that just consumes her, and I think she's going to die, and she's staying in that terrible apartment where there's no heat. You know, it's still wintertime out. There's snow on the ground. I think I'm making her sicker. I think she's got to get away from me because this apartment and living with me, I think, is killing her." Very impassioned. He obviously feels terrible for Mimi, but again, and I'm sorry if this sounds like I'm being hard on Rodolfo, but that is not a sentiment that does him much credit. Now he's saying, yeah, she's really sick. I think she might be dying, and there's no heat in my apartment. I think it's making her worse. Yeah, we got to break up. We can't be together. This is true love? Hey, Rodolfo, how about you get a job? How about you start shoveling coal or cleaning out a barn somewhere, get a little money, and take her to the doctor? How about that? How about you be like Des Grieux, the hero of Puccini's previous opera, Manon Lescaut, who, when his true love Manon was being deported to America because she'd been convicted of being a prostitute, begged to get on the ship and go with her and leave his life there in Paris. And in Act 4, they're dying of starvation and thirst in one another's arms. Yeah, how about that? That's true love. That I'll buy. Yeah. Oh, she's sick and I don't have any heat. I think I have to leave her. I feel really bad about that. This is immature love, but this is verismo. And now I know what you're thinking. Opera lovers, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're saying out loud right now, and you're probably pounding the table. You're saying, but I think you're wrong, Glenn. The music is so beautiful. You just hate these characters, and you think Puccini thinks they're bad. No, I don't. The music is beautiful and compelling because Puccini wants us to empathize with them. He wants us to realize that at one point we were all young and immature and foolish and trying to figure out how to be adults and very often making a mess of it. He wants us to like these characters. He wants us to see ourselves in elements of their behavior and their struggle to become functioning adults. So yes, the music makes us identify with them. This is verismo. There are no heroes and no villains and no chaste maidenly sopranos. And sure enough, when Mimi, she didn't realize she was as sick as that. Mimi thought it was just allergies up to this point, I guess. So now she hears Rodolfo say that she's dying, and she is quite sensible. She sings an aria, Donde lieta usci, in which she says, "Addio senza rancore." All right, goodbye. Let's just part as friends, no bitterness. And she goes through and in quite an objective way starts making a list of, all right, so I'm going to move out. He says, "You're going to move out?" "Yes, I'm leaving you." And that's okay. No bitterness, no fault, no blame. "Listen, I've got a few things in your room," she says. I left scattered around. There's a gold ring in the drawer. And, oh, yes, there's a book of prayers. Anything else you find, would you just kind of wrap it up, and I'll send for it, okay? This is the grisette realizing, as all grisettes do, that they have to move on. Right. Now, is there melancholy? Is there regret there? Sure. She was hoping this would work out, but it's better to get your things and move on and find another young man than to be as miserable with a pathologically jealous idiot who makes life not worth living. It's better to move on. Now, I'm going to return in a moment. For the moment, I'm going to pass over the great quartet in which the tragic couple and the comic couple break up simultaneously. I'd like to come back to that. And instead just move on to Act 4, in which we find out that, this is not Aida and Radames dying together in a tomb for the sake of being together. It's a long time later. The snow has melted. It's either springtime or summertime. The libretto isn't specific. But it's months later, and guess what? The affair is over, and Musetta hasn't seen, Marcello hasn't seen Musetta for quite a long time, and Rodolfo hasn't seen Mimi in quite a long time. And in fact, when Marcello says, "Oh, guess who I saw the other day? I saw Mimi." "Really?" says Rodolfo. "No kidding. Hey, what's she up to?" And we find out that she's no longer back in her little room staring out at the skies of Paris embroidering flowers. She is not a seamstress anymore. Oh, no, she's riding in a coach with a nobleman as her companion, and she's dressed to the nines. And Rodolfo's, well, good for her. And then there is a duet in which they're both mooning a little bit about their girlfriends that they no longer have. And Rodolfo says, "Oh, Mimi, tu più non tornerai. You're not going to come around anymore. Gee whiz, you were so pretty. Your little hands were so pretty, and your hair was so pretty, and all this." There's regret. There's a bit of nostalgia. Friends, he's not desperate. He's not searching the streets for her. Take me back. He's moved on. Now, there's some horseplay among the four Bohemians. Oh, they're capering around. They're sort of acting like they're 13 years old instead of aspiring immortal artists. And suddenly the door slams open, and there's Musetta with the terrible announcement that Mimi is dying of tuberculosis and has only minutes to live. And now comes the point at which childhood ends once and for all. As the Apostle Paul said in the New Testament, now is the time to put away the things of childhood, because now there's mortality. Now someone in their circle, or who was in their circle, is dying. And that's what often forces young people to adopt adult grown-up attitudes, the realization that they're not going to live forever. Folks, that's why your teenage son's car insurance rates are so high. They think they're immortal. They think they'll never die. And now they're getting snapped out of that dream, because here is a woman in the final agonizing death throes of tuberculosis. And with Mimi has had to grow up faster than the four Bohemians and Musetta, because when you're facing your own death, it makes you stop and think about what's really important in the world. Have you ever heard on a TV talk show the host interviewing maybe a young child, 6 or 7, from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, who's maybe tragically got months to live with leukemia or something of the kind? Don't those children always sound incredibly mature? Well, I just want to make the best of every day and live in the moment and hope that, that the research will help others someday. My gosh, that little kid, 6 years old, well, Mimi has grown up in a hurry. And just as she did in Act 1, when I believe she waited until the Bohemians had left the apartment so she could be alone with Rodolfo, now in a nice bit of symmetry, once again, she pretends to be sleeping, and after the other Bohemians have gone off to get the doctor and get some muffs for her cold hands and so forth, she says, "Are we alone? Good. I was waiting for them to go because I have so much I want to tell you." She says, "But here's the main thing I want you to know, and I mean this with all the depth of the ocean. You are the love of my life." She's figured it out. Yes, for this grisette, who has minutes to live, she realized this was not just a boy buying me dinner. This was, in spite of all his flaws, this was the boy I loved. I could have had a life with. This was the love of my life. And I want you to know that in return, Rodolfo does not say, "And I love you. You are the love of my life." He says, "Mia bella Mimi." He says, "Oh, my beautiful Mimi." He says, "You look beautiful." That's not the same thing. I think Rodolfo is realizing the extent, the scope of his foolishness, the extent to which he blew this, what could have been available to him. And I want to point out, you heard the passion and intensity of Mimi's declaration of love there. Think back to what I played for you near the beginning of this program when Rodolfo in Act 1 said, "Que ma mi dir?" Tell me you love me. And she answered. She said, "I love you," but remember, was there much passion? Was there much intensity? Io t'amo. Compare that first declaration of love with this final one. You see, it took a while for Mimi to stop playing the grisette and to understand what's important in life. She figured it out. By the time Rodolfo figures it out, if he ever does, it's too late. And I don't know if Rodolfo will ever be happy in love, because pathological jealousy, my friends, that is a difficult personality flaw to lick. That one is tough to overcome. He's going to need a lot of counseling and therapy. Now, I'm going to take a couple of extra minutes, go over my usual time allotment. Don't report me to the FCC. Because I have to play you a couple of minutes of what is by far the best moment in La Boheme. And I think that the quartet from Act 3, when the two couples break up simultaneously, I think it's not only the best thing in La Boheme, I think it's one of the great ensemble numbers in all of opera. I think it's the craftsmanship in this number is on a par with anything by Mozart, Verdi, Wagner, Bizet, you name it. Now, what's remarkable about this opera, as I mentioned briefly, is the incredible balancing act, the yin and yang of comedy and drama. There are moments when the four Bohemians are acting like goofballs, like very sophomoric undergraduates in a dorm room late at night. And there are moments of high drama and passion and so forth. And the constant fluctuation and toggling back and forth between comedy and drama is the hallmark of this opera. It's a point of architecture, of architectural structure in the libretto that Puccini was adamant about the librettist achieving for him. That's what he wanted, because when we're all young, when we're 18 to 20 years of age, life is a roller coaster, from happiness to despair, from problems to playing and so forth. Well, if you're interested in cooking, and you do follow a lot of recipes, you'll be familiar with this instruction that you read in recipes. Reduce the sauce. What happens when you reduce a sauce? It means there's a large volume of liquid, and you let it simmer and boil away until most of the liquid has evaporated, and you're left with a much smaller, concentrated, very intensely flavored residue. Well, here we have a 4-act opera that constantly toggles back and forth between comedy and drama. And in this about 6-minute quartet that I'm going to play you a couple of minutes from, you have the entire gist of that aspect boiled down, as it were, to a single quartet in which a tragic couple is breaking up with melancholy, trying to remember the good memories of their affair, but face to face with all the problems and dysfunction, and wishing that they could remain together, but realizing it's not so, while simultaneously there's Musetta in the middle of a hissy fit. She and Marcello are in a very comic manner calling each other names. She says, "Oh, you're a painter, you're a house painter. Well, you're a witch. Well, you're a snake. Well, you're..." And these two things are happening at the same time. And it's this whole aspect of young people trying to figure out how to have a love relationship and not doing a very good job of it, just as none of us did with our first boyfriends and girlfriends. Puccini has reduced the sauce, and even when they're all four people are speaking at the same time, because you have layers of musical texture, you always know what's happening. Operatic composition doesn't come at a higher quality than this. So look, Don't get mad at me. I'm not being hard on these characters. I like Rodolfo, I like Mimi, but they are Verismo characters. Um, Mimi is not a guileless, sweet, innocent seamstress who loves flowers. Well, she's kind of that, but really she's a grisette. She is a working girl in Paris, a survivor who's trying to live and not starve to death. She's willing, as all the grisettes were, to leverage her sexuality to be picked up by boys, to be provided with the necessities of life in exchange for sleeping with them, and she's willing to do that, and she marches into Rodolfo's apartment with that plan in mind. She manipulates him into asking her out to dinner, and once they're in downtown Paris, she's all about getting him to pick up a few things that she doesn't have the money to buy, a bonnet, a necklace. In time, because of her failing health, she grows up in a hurry and she realizes what she had in this imperfect boy who is not capable of loving her in the manner that she deserves, who doesn't know what love is, who thinks that love is all about him and how he feels and what his emotions are, who cannot be the stalwart champion that she needs. These are real people. They are flawed but likable, and that's why their music is so beautiful. And that's why La Boheme is the Puccini opera that even Igor Stravinsky, said never failed to leave him whistling for his lost youth. I love it. So do you. Come and see our production of it. It'll be great, and I will see you at the Opera House.